Pennsylvania used to have mountain hotels that looked like castles, not little roadside motels, not chain hotels off the interstate, actual mountain palaces, enormous wooden resorts with grand porches, towers, ballrooms, dining halls, manicured lawns, hiking trails, river views, railroad access, and the kind of old money vacation energy that feels almost impossible to imagine today. And then, one by one, a shocking number of them burned down. In the Delaware Water Gap, in the Lehigh Gorge, and across the Poconos, entire resort towns were once built around these massive hotels. They attracted wealthy tourists from Philadelphia, New York, and beyond. They helped turn Pennsylvania's mountains into one of the East Coast's great vacation regions. But many of these buildings were made of wood. They were huge, they were remote, they were hard to protect, and when fire broke out, there was often very little anyone could do. Today, a lot of what remains are foundations, old postcards, place names, stone walls, and stories. So, this is the story of Pennsylvania's lost mountain palaces, the grand hotels that made the Poconos famous, the fires that erased them, and the strange modern afterlife of one resort site that may become Margaritaville. Before the Poconos became known for water parks, casinos, honeymoon resorts, ski hills, and I-80 traffic, they were one of the great escape zones of the Northeast. In the 1800s and early 1900s, cities were crowded, hot, smoky, and industrial. If you had money, the mountains were where you went to breathe. The Delaware Water Gap especially became famous because it had basically everything a resort town needed: dramatic scenery, river access, mountain views, hiking, fishing, and most importantly, railroads. That railroad part matters. Before cars made every vacation a road trip, the railroad was the thing that connected city people to the mountains. A family could leave the heat and noise of New York or Philadelphia and arrive in a dramatic Pennsylvania mountain town surrounded by cliffs, forests, waterfalls, and fresh air. And when tourists arrived, hotels followed. These hotels were not subtle. They were built to impress. Long porches wrapped around the buildings. Towers rose above the trees. Guests could sit outside and look over the Delaware River, walk through gardens, attend dinners, listen to music, or take guided trips into the woods. The Poconos were not just a place to visit, they were a place to be seen visiting. And one of the earliest and most famous examples was the Kittatinny Hotel, also known as the Kittatinny House, at the Delaware Water Gap. The Kittatinny was one of the defining hotels of the old Water Gap resort era. Imagine arriving there around 1900. You are not pulling up to a parking lot off an exit ramp. You are arriving at a grand mountain resort overlooking one of the most dramatic natural gaps in the eastern United States. The Delaware River cuts through the mountains. The air is cooler. The porches are full. Guests are dressed for dinner. The whole place is designed to make you feel like you have entered a different world. Old photographs of the Kittatinny show the scale of what used to be here. It was not just a building. It was an entire destination. But today, if you go looking for it, you will not find the hotel. You find the landscape. You find the overlook. You find traces. According to National Park Service history, the Kittatinny Hotel was claimed by fire in 1931, and some of its foundations can still be seen near Resort Point Overlook on Route 611. And that becomes the theme of this entire story. Because the Kittatinny was not some random, isolated loss, it was part of a pattern. Nearby stood another giant of the Delaware Water Gap resort era, the Water Gap House. The Water Gap House was one of the other major hotels that helped define this region. Like the Kittatinny, it served the old tourism economy that existed before modern highways completely changed how people traveled. These hotels were built for long stays. They were built for people who came to the mountains for the season, or at least for enough time to justify a hotel that operated more like a small village than a modern overnight stop. But in 1915, the Water Gap House burned. The National Park Service describes the Water Gap House fire as one of the largest fires Monroe County had ever seen. Think about what that means. A huge resort hotel in a mountain town burning in the early 20th century. This was not just the loss of a business. This was the loss of a landmark, a social hub, a piece of the town's identity, and a physical symbol of the region's golden age. And when these hotels burned, they were not always replaced. That is one of the biggest differences between that era and now. A modern hotel burns, and there is a decent chance something new eventually replaces it. But by the time many of these grand hotels were lost, the world around them was already changing. Cars were changing travel. Vacations were becoming shorter and more flexible. The railroad resort era was starting to fade. So when fire took one of these buildings, it often did not just destroy a hotel. It ended a chapter of the region. And that brings us to one of the most beautiful lost resort sites in Pennsylvania, Glen Onoco, near Jim Thorpe. Today, Jim Thorpe already feels cinematic, with its mountain setting, railroad history, old architecture, and Lehigh Gorge scenery. But, just outside town, Glen Onoco was once a resort destination of its own. The southern end of what is now Lehigh Gorge State Park was popularized by railroads around the turn of the 20th century, and one of its major attractions was Hotel Wahnetah. Hotel Wahnetah was not as massive as some of the Delaware Water Gap giants, but it had an incredible location. It sat near Glen Onoco Falls, surrounded by the dramatic scenery of the Lehigh Gorge. Guests came for fresh air, hiking, waterfalls, mountain views, and resort life. According to Pennsylvania DCNR, Hotel Wahnetah had 47 rooms, a dance pavilion, tennis courts, and access to the Glen Onoco Falls trails. That is wild to picture today, because Glen Onoco now feels rugged, dangerous, and almost mythical, the kind of place where you look around and wonder how anyone managed to build a resort there. But they did. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, places like this were not just wilderness, they were destinations. Railroads brought people directly into the mountains, and resorts turned the landscape into an experience. Then, in 1911, fire closed Hotel Wahnetah. According to DCNR, another fire in 1917 helped end the Glen Onoco resort era entirely. And after that, nature slowly took the story back. The crowds faded, the buildings vanished, the rail lines changed purpose, the hotel became a memory. Today, people can move through the same landscape without realizing they are walking through the ghost of a resort town. And that brings us to the modern epilogue, Pocono Manor. Pocono Manor opened in 1902 and became one of the great symbols of the Pocono resort tradition. It was known as the Grand Lady of the Mountains, and unlike the older Delaware Water Gap hotels, it survived deep into the modern era. This was not some forgotten ruin from the 1800s. Pocono Manor was still part of living memory. It hosted weddings, vacations, events, and generations of visitors. Then, in November 2019, a massive fire consumed the historic inn. That fire hits differently because it happened recently. This was not a grainy postcard tragedy from 1915. People saw the smoke, the news footage, and the ruins of a place that had stood for more than a century. And then the story took a very modern turn. In 2022, plans were announced for a Margaritaville resort village at the Pocono Manor site, with hotel, RV, and cabin-style accommodations. And honestly, that contrast says almost everything about how much the Poconos have changed. The old resort promised fresh air, long porches, mountain views, formal dining, and escape from industrial cities. The modern resort promises entertainment, restaurants, pools, cabins, RV sites, and a branded vacation experience. Same mountains, totally different dream. And that is what makes these lost hotels so interesting. They are not just abandoned buildings or old fire stories. They show how transportation, tourism, architecture, fire, branding, and memory all collide. The railroads created these places. The mountains made them desirable. The hotels made them famous. Fire erased them. Highways changed what came next. So the next time you drive through the Poconos, hike near the Delaware Water Gap, or pass through Jim Thorpe, remember that the woods were not always just woods. Some of those quiet places were once crowded with guests, luggage, music, trains, dinner bells, and people sitting on giant porches looking out over the mountains. Pennsylvania once had mountain palaces. Some burned, some vanished, and some are being reborn as something completely different.